So lately it feels like Blizzard has been actively trying to destroy their reputation as a modern developer. Ever since they were bought by Activision, it feels like the only thing this company cares about is how much money they can make through any means necessary, and with next to zero respect for their fan base.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
Now don't get me wrong, they have made some good stuff since then. Diablo 3 was eventually great, after they got rid of the auction house. I've never played Hearthstone before, but I've heard good things about it. But when they struck gold with Overwatch in 2016, something changed. Everything they have put out since has either been a blatant cash grab with very little effort put in, or a decent game held back by some of the most egregious examples of how truly money-hungry a company in this industry can be. Now I could make a video about why Overwatch 2 is such a bad sequel, or why Diablo Immortal deserves to be one of the lowest rated games in history, but I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to take you back to a time when Blizzard was not only a respected game developer, but also one of the best. I want to take you back to Diablo 2. Released in June of 2000, Diablo 2 is the sequel to one of the most important ARPGs ever made. Diablo 1 was not the first action RPG, but it was one of the best at the time, and really helped popularize the genre. Diablo 2 takes the innovations made in that game, like its approach to world building, itemization, and replay value, and pushes them even further. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, we'll start with the visuals. Now there's two different versions of Diablo 2 you can choose from. The original 2000 release, and the 2021 remaster known as Diablo 2 Resurrected. For most people, I would recommend going for the remaster over the original. It's pretty much just a visual overhaul, with only the most hardcore fans being able to notice the other changes. It's an incredibly faithful remaster of the original, so much so that you can switch back and forth between the new and original graphics at any time, which is a nice touch. The only reason I would ever recommend going back to the original is for mod support, which Diablo 2 has a ton of. But if you just want to experience the base game with a new coat of paint, D2R is the best way to do that. Visually, Diablo 2 is a great looking game. The world of Diablo is all about getting lost in a dark, immersive atmosphere. The second you load into the first area, you'll immediately notice just how thick the ambience can be at times thanks to the combination of its gothic art style combined with some truly iconic music. And hey, the weather effects are a nice touch. This immersion is kept throughout the whole experience as you explore the game's many different locations ranging from underground caves to dense jungles, a sprawling desert, and beyond. I'll get into it more during the gameplay, but Diablo 2's environments are randomly generated, which also helps in giving you a strong feeling of exploration. I simply cannot express enough just how enjoyable it is to move through this game's world and take in every location it has to offer. I want to highlight the lighting especially. Look at the way the lighting adapts to your position as you move through these underground caves. It's just awesome, and something I haven't seen done in many other games before. I'll also quickly mention performance on PC. It's very well optimized, and any relatively modern PC should have no issue running it well. One thing I'll mention though is that there is this issue where your frame rate will just randomly drop to around half of what you normally have, and the only way to fix it is by restarting. It doesn't happen super often, but it's something I figured was worth mentioning in case you're considering the PC version. I've also never encountered any bugs worth mentioning in my hundreds of hours of playtime, so all good news there. So, the visuals are great, what about the gameplay? Let's first begin where every RPG begins, the character menu. So unfortunately, there isn't any kind of character creation in this game when it comes to picking stuff like your skin color, hairstyle, facial markings, or anything like that. You can select your class and your name, that's it. In terms of classes, there is a nice selection available. There's the Amazon, Assassin, Necromancer, Barbarian, Paladin, the Sorceress, and the Rogue. This is a choice that you're going to want to put some thought into when you first start this game, because this choice will determine the gameplay style that you'll have. Every class in this game is viable for the normal difficulty, but some are definitely better than others if you decide to go for the higher difficulties and other late game activities. But as with most RPGs, your character is pretty uninteresting at the start of the game. Your chosen class's strengths and weaknesses won't become immediately obvious until you start to level up a bit and get some gear. Diablo 2 has many different build options for every class, depending on the type of playstyle you want to end up with. Some are focused on range, while others focus on melee. Some are glass cannons, and some are tanks. Really, if you can think of it, there's probably a build for it. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend that someone new to this game, or RPGs in general, to go for a build that relies more on either passive or ranged attacks, as melee can be quite a bit more challenging. For this video, I've decided to go for the Holy Fire Paladin, which is a build that heavily relies on a passive skill that slowly burns enemies to death, but is also able to handle itself in melee combat. It's a very good beginner-friendly build, as it doesn't require a lot of specific gear or late-game skills to be effective. So, you've picked your class and decided what build you want to go for. You now find yourself in the middle of a camp. Now what? Now is when we get into the progression style of Diablo 2, which is one of my favorite aspects of this game. The first thing you'll want to do is just get to know everyone in the camp, or at least what their role is in assisting you. You'll eventually be given a quest from one of them, asking you to go slay all the enemies in a nearby cave. Notice how that's all the information you get. No objective marker on your map, no arrow in front of you telling you where to go, nothing. Just a quest journal with some words in it. That's how every objective in this game is. Diablo 2 is not a game that's going to hold your hand every step of the way like a lot of newer RPGs do. You have to actually go out and explore in order to move forward. This is not a game that's going to just give you a big red marker on your map and tell you exactly where everything is. You'll often need to stop and read the quest entries multiple times before you figure out where you need to go, and that is why I enjoyed this game's progression so much. It feels like a game that actually respects my own intelligence, and doesn't just tell me what to do and where to go the whole time like a lot of newer games do. Same goes for the progression of your character. You feel so weak and powerless at the start of this game, struggling to take on even just a few enemies at a time, to eventually becoming this unstoppable force of nature, easily wiping out an entire screen's worth of enemies in just a few seconds. You're constantly on the lookout for your next upgrade, whether it be a new skill or a piece of gear. Now the quests themselves are very basic. They pretty much all revolve around going to a specific location and either killing an enemy or collecting an item, but I'm fine with that. Diablo 2 is a game that is way more focused on the journey rather than the destination. So many of my favorite moments in this game were about the series of events that it took me to finally reach a certain place, rather than what happened when I eventually got there. Each new quest you get represents a new journey that you're about to go on with its own set of trials and challenges to overcome, and that is why Diablo 2 is such a fun game to experience for the first time. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the world of Diablo 2 is randomly generated, which just means that the map layout that I have is different than the map layout that someone else has, which is both a good and a bad thing. It greatly improves the replay value of this game, because it means that every playthrough will feel fairly different than the last, thanks to the randomization. But if you're someone like me that's been playing this game for years and just likes to hop back in every few months to try out a new build, the randomized environments can get a bit annoying. They can often lead to moments where you're just wandering around a certain area, staring at your map, waiting for the thing that you need to suddenly appear. Overall though, I think the randomization is definitely a positive rather than a negative. Let's talk about the combat and itemization now. This is where most of my major complaints for this game start to come up. When it comes to items, Diablo 2 can be a very RNG heavy game. See, a lot of the higher end builds in this game revolve around an item called runes. Runes are rare items that can be used to create something called a rune word. This is when you apply multiple runes onto a piece of equipment in order to dramatically improve its statistics. There's 33 of these runes in total, and while they are a cool mechanic that is really fun to experiment with early on when you only have a couple of them, they're also kind of a nightmare and a virtual roadblock to a lot of the best builds out there. If you want to have a super high-end build capable of demolishing any late-game content, you're essentially forced to farm them for hours until you get the ones that you need. It's for that reason that I tend to just avoid a lot of specific builds in this game that require these more complicated rune words. Like I said, rune words are a really unique way to upgrade your gear that also contribute a lot to this game's already great gear economy, and I haven't seen anything like it in another RPG before. I just wish there were more consistent ways to acquire some of them. Now let's talk combat. In general, Diablo 2's combat is going to feel pretty dated to someone that hasn't played it before. The style of combat you'll have depends quite a bit on the class you choose, but they all share the same fundamentals. Movement is going to be the thing that immediately throws off newcomers. It's kinda hard to explain, but basically the way that you move around in this game is not like how it is in most other top-down games. Take turning for example. You can't just snap your character to a certain direction and immediately start attacking an enemy there. Instead, you have to wait for your character to finish physically moving before you can begin the process of actually attacking them. It's going to feel really weird and clunky at first, but I've grown to really appreciate it over the years. It adds more depth to combat beyond just clicking on every enemy on your screen until they die, because you have to also be aware of what your character's current stance is. The other main thing that's going to take some getting used to is the healing system, specifically regarding potions. Now this is one of those things in this game that has not aged well at all. What's wrong with using potions to heal, you ask? That's how the newer Diablo games do it after all. And you're right, that's not the problem. The problem is the fact that you have to literally fill your inventory with them so that you have enough of them to use throughout your journeys. It's not like the newer Diablo games where they're just on a cooldown. No, when you use a potion, it's gone, and you need to manually put more in your hotbar from your inventory for future use. What this boils down to is the need to stock up on them every so often, use them until you run out, come back to the nearest settlement and buy more, rinse and repeat. Trust me when I say that you are going to be hearing this sound a lot.
2 hours later.
So, Diablo 2's gameplay is mostly great if you enjoy more classic RPGs, but it is not without its faults, and there is a pretty steep learning curve for newer players to this style of game. As far as length goes, Diablo 2 can vary wildly because of just how many different builds there are, and depending on how often you get lost or die, but I would say that 25 to 30 hours is a good estimate for our first time playthrough. Let's move on to the story. Diablo 2's narrative takes place in the world of Sanctuary, the mortal realm created by angels and demons. Given this is a more traditional RPG, you don't play as anyone specific. Instead, you get to create your own character and be whoever you want. The game opens with an incredibly well-made cutscene. Seriously, all the cutscenes in this game are just awesome to watch. They were all remade for this remaster, and they are a real highlight every time you get to watch one. In this cutscene, we get introduced to two characters. One named Marius, and one whose name I won't tell you, because it's a spoiler for a later moment in the story that I would rather you experience for yourself. Anyway, Marius is the one that narrates all the events that we see in the cutscenes, with some very talented voice work, might I add.
They're always watching.
That's not his only role though, he's also an important character in the plot. Pretty early on, we find out that Marius is responsible for freeing a powerful demon named Baal, who just so happens to be the brother of two other demons, Diablo and Mephisto. Together, they make up the Prime Evils. Their ultimate goal is to take over Sanctuary and use it as an outpost for Hell and its forces. You, as the player, are now tasked with defeating these forces through any means necessary, ultimately saving Sanctuary. Diablo 2's story can be somewhat confusing to follow if this is your first introduction to the series. The game is divided up into 5 main acts, each serving as their own event in the overall narrative. You get one cutscene before and after each of these acts. What might confuse some people is that the cutscene events you see before each act have already happened before you got there. This means that the story beats in the cutscenes are not happening in real time, and are instead used to show events of the past. Like I said, it's kinda confusing at first, and it makes you think for a minute, which I like. The rest of the storytelling is all done through gameplay events and through character dialogue. Every act has multiple characters that you'll need to interact with in order to fully understand what's going on, and to go deeper into the lore if you're interested. I should also mention that you don't need to have played Diablo 1 to understand this game's story. The first act makes a few references to that game, and there will be a couple details that go over your head if this is your first Diablo game, but aside from that, you'll have no issue starting here. The great thing about Diablo's story is that it can really be as deep or as simple as you want it to be. You can absolutely go down a 4-hour rabbit hole on the internet, researching every character's secrets and what led up to every event if you really want to. On the other hand, if you're not into that kind of thing, you can completely ignore it and just skip through all the dialogue boxes so that you can get on your way with slaughtering hundreds of enemies. And that's Diablo 2. This game would go on to be known as a classic in the ever-expanding world of RPGs, and I think it absolutely deserves that title. It would inevitably get multiple sequels, some better than others, but I don't think any of them have even come close to topping what Blizzard achieved all those years ago. Today, Diablo 2 stands as a reminder of the Blizzard that no longer exists, gone and consumed by corporate greed. But I hope that through this video, I was able to take you back to a time when Blizzard's main goal was making a great game, rather than trying to figure out how they can somehow charge $65 for microtransactions. Thanks for watching, and have a good one. Seriously, who would buy this?